Welcome to the first episode of Learning for Life podcast. I'm your host, Alexander. This is a podcast about amazing learning tools. We talk both with developers building them and users improving their learning. Our guest today is James from Experimental Learning. He has a cool YouTube channel with some high quality videos, very valuable if you're into spaced repetition and SuperMemo. Without further ado, let me get James on screen. Please, James, introduce yourself to the community.
Yeah, well, thank you. Basically, my name's James. I've been using spaced repetition for quite a long time now, I think around 6 years or so. And I started back in high school with Anki just for cramming for exams and learning like languages and stuff. And I think around 3 years ago, I kind of stumbled across SuperMemo and got interested in it because I saw this like incremental reading thing, and apparently it lets you learn like a bunch of articles all in parallel and stuff that sounded really enticing. And at that point, I was actually interested in studying like finance and economics. But like 4 months into studying with SuperMemo and just like exploring different topics and stuff, I kind of just randomly stumbled into programming. And then that sort of just completely took over my sort of studying life. I just ended up spending a bunch of time over the past 3 years
So
learning programming with spaced
when
repetition.
did you start your YouTube channel? Because you have this YouTube channel and you have some cool videos on incremental reading, very long. I love the long form content, so for me it's great to watch.
Yeah. I can't remember exactly when I started, but yeah, I was just trying to make the videos that I would have wanted to see when I was just starting, basically. So that's why I did the long form ones, because like the creator of SuperMemo, Piotr Wozniak, he's done some videos of himself like using incremental reading and stuff like that. But it's actually really useful just to see like a normal user like doing their day to day in SuperMemo, because it's such a weird and niche and complex piece of software. It's just nice to see what someone actually does day to day in it. So that's what I was trying to do. And then I also do some like just like more conceptual stuff, like breaking down what is incremental reading, what is incremental writing, like stuff about this philosophy of learning and stuff like that as well. But yeah.
Nice. So I see Guillem here is saying hi to YouTube.
Yeah.
So if you're watching on this on YouTube, make sure to like and subscribe, and you can also check out James' channel there. There's the link, and we'll have it in the description. So for somebody watching this for the first time and just discovering this randomly, like what is spaced repetition? Like what is it?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's really hard to introduce to people because like you sort of have to experience it to really understand what's going on. But I guess how I describe it is like it's just an efficient way for learning and remembering information. So essentially, with spaced repetition, you have this algorithm, which is a computer program, which records when you've viewed a piece of information, and then based on whether you were able to recall that piece of information when it's shown to you or whether you just forgot it, it will then calculate a new repetition date for you in the future based on that. So if you were able to remember it, it might put it further in the future. And then if you weren't able to remember it, it maybe show you it like next week or something like that. And basically the idea is to maximize your learning, maximize your memory, retention of information while minimizing the cost. So you don't want to do a bunch of repetitions and waste them on stuff you already know. You just want to do the minimum repetitions to memorize a piece of information. So yeah, it's just a great way to learn, basically.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It works. It works. That's the best thing about it, if you're able to use it consistently. So do you want to show your screen and the
sure.
setup?
Are they able to see it? Okay.
Yeah, chat confirms that they can see.
Okay, sweet.
Good.
Yeah, so essentially I'll just break down what's going on. Obviously it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on the screen, but basically this is just a flashcard, right? So the stuff in this box is what's going to get shown to you as like the question side, and then the stuff in the second box is like the answer side. So if I just I'll show you what it looks like when you do a repetition. This will get shown to me, and then I show the answer and I decide, was I able to recall it easily? And then I hit the smiley face, or was I wasn't able to recall it at all. I hit the unhappy face, basically. And based on that, the computer program will decide when to show it to me in the future, basically. So Yeah, essentially what I've done here is I've just sorted all of the flashcards that I've made over the past man, it must be like 2.5 years or 3 years by now. And I don't know if you want me to show them now or later, Alexander. But yeah, I was wanted to show you like the kinds of cards that I was making at the beginning and the kinds of cards that I've been making recently, because
You can show whatever you want. It's totally fine. We have time, so
sure. Yeah, so basically with I'd had like a couple of attempts before at learning programming, and I found it really difficult to get into. And like even just the simplest concepts, like what is a variable, what are data types, like what is a list and stuff like that. Even the most simple concepts seem to be impossible for me to like cram into my brain. And I remember I was using like Code Academy to learn Python, and I just couldn't like absorb even the simplest thing. So that's really where I found like spaced repetition was just super useful. So you'll see in like these beginning ones, I'm just like learning like the simplest concepts from Git, and just trying to nail down like what exactly is Git, what is it useful for. And then for example, if I just scroll down, I know I've got some stuff from like when I was learning sorry, this is this is kind of awkward to navigate, but from learning the like simplest concepts of C, the C programming language, and just general concepts as well. And yeah, I just found it like pretty transformative in terms of like going from just completely not getting it and not being able to acquire any sort of skills in programming to actually being able to learn these things basically really easily. Just I found that spaced repetition basically just makes learning a choice. That's kind of a quote stolen from Michael Nielsen. I don't know if you've read that article, but he says that like spaced repetition makes memory a choice. And yeah, I guess I completely agree with that, because
which
really
article?
Like.
Which article?
I'm not sure exactly. It might be either this is the name of the website or the name of the article, but it's called like augmenting cognition or augmenting long-term memory or something like that.
Okay,
But
I'll add a link to that later.
Yeah. So that'd just be like a quick introduction. I don't want to go super deep yet into all of this. I guess we can just discuss a little bit more about like my history with spaced repetition or history with programming or anything like that.
So the first language you picked was, okay, it's Python from Code Academy, right?
Yeah. That was like before I started using like spaced repetition and everything, I decided I want to learn Python because I was interested in finance and economics. And with Python, you know, there's a lot of good libraries that support basically just importing data from like trading exchanges and stuff like that. And then you can like start doing some analysis. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'm going to write myself a program to like print money for me, essentially, or something like that. But obviously, you know, I just couldn't grasp like what programming actually was or how to actually write a program. It just the concepts just were so foreign and alien to me that I just didn't get it. And yeah, in the beginning stages, just having that repetition of simple concepts like what is an integer or something like that, what is a variable, what does it mean to like save something to memory or something like that. That was so useful.
Did you read an article on Code Academy, and then after you read it, extract stuff, or how did you approach it? How did you break down something new?
So this, so the Code Academy stage was before I actually started using spaced repetition. So back then, I was just doing the most primitive thing possible. Just I don't know. I just read the thing. I basically just copy the code that they'd presented in the sort of instructional article or videos. I can't remember exactly what it was. But so when I actually found spaced repetition, I started applying like incremental reading through SuperMemo and spaced repetition to programming. What I would do is I'd have like, so in the very beginning, I'd have a textbook and I would go through, do the exercises, like read through the text, pick out the bits that were useful and interesting to me, like stuff about data types and stuff like that, create flashcards and also do the exercises. And sometimes I'd even add the exercises into the spaced repetition system, which I found to be a terrible idea basically. But yeah, that's how it changed. Like just essentially what I did is just add this spaced repetition stage in, and it just made all the difference in terms of making it easier to learn.
Yeah, so I'm seeing from chat, Marcel has now pointed out 2 times that I am not letting you finish your sentence. And so this is the first episode. So of course, stuff is going to be wiggly. And if you feel like I'm interrupting you, just let me know, James, and I'll let you speak. So
I didn't feel like you were interrupting at all. Like sometimes I even like ramble on. You're going to have to stop me from talking too much. Like the problem is that it's very difficult to to introduce this subject, especially if there are people in the chat that or the people are going to watch this not knowing anything about spaced repetition. That's going to be really difficult like to explain all of these concepts, programming, like learning programming over the past few years, and like what is spaced repetition, why is it useful. So yeah, feel free to interrupt whenever, like go ahead.
Great, then I'm just going to ignore chat a little bit so it doesn't get annoying. So what I'm trying to understand is how you went from like the workflow, right? Because like some problem when people are introduced to spaced repetition, right? It's usually via Anki. It's possible that it's also via SuperMemo too. I don't know how widespread that is, but language learning, especially Japanese, you're learning Japanese and then you hear about Anki. Now it's becoming more and more mainstream, right? So one normal thing that happens is that people start using Anki. They see the magic, they see how spaced repetition works, and then they maybe abuse it, but like it's not easy to use it. It's not straightforward to use it, right? So that's why I'm trying to see like how did you use it in programming, right? I still don't get how exactly, like if you use SuperMemo, that approach I get, where you're deploying incremental reading, breaking down information, and then you have topics and so on. But so did you use it? Did you use Anki at all for programming, or was it just SuperMemo?
I don't think I ever used Anki for programming. Maybe like a tiny little bit, but again, that was like one of those failed attempts when I was trying to learn Python. It just didn't work for me. Like I said, like as soon as I started, just like what I found is like I'd be basically doing exactly the same thing as I was doing before. So I'd still be doing like exercises and stuff like that, but I'd just add in that the repetitions at the start of the day, like answering these flashcards. That was basically what that was the difference between my previous failed attempts and the sort of more successful attempts. The flashcards were the difference that sort of allowed me to like retain those concepts in memory, and then just like every time you approach a new chapter in the textbook, you haven't forgotten the old stuff that you already learned. It's still in your memory, so you're just able to build like consistently. So learning just becomes like kind of inevitable in a sense. So that, yeah.
So how did you discover SuperMemo? Because you started out as an Anki user, right?
Yeah. I think I honestly don't know. Like I can't remember. But I think it was just I came across some comment on Reddit. It must have been in the Anki Reddit, talking about SuperMemo and how it's like the grandfather of spaced repetition. It was like the spaced repetition app that all of the spaced repetition children sort of descended from, right? And then I think I read this article in the magazine Wired, called something like, if you want to remember everything, then surrender to this algorithm. And it basically talks about Piotr Wozniak, the creator of spaced repetition, and his sort of kind of weird mad scientist approach to learning and sleep, creativity, school, everything. So that got me just totally hooked. So I couldn't read that and not try it out because it just sounded way too interesting. So that was really what got me interested in it. But yeah, I was already into spaced repetition. I'd seen how it could be applied to like language learning already, and so I was already convinced of the power of it. And I was already shown through language learning that like unless you are doing repetitions, like your memory is decaying at like a scary rate, because as soon as you have that experience of it being successful in language learning, you realize that in every other domain where you're not using this technology, like you're just losing out on so much. Like there's no difference between not a significant difference between the role of memory in language learning and the role of memory in learning anything else. So, knowledge is knowledge. If you want to retain it, you have to be consciously applying like good learning techniques like spaced repetition to maintaining it.
Yeah, I see. So if you look back to, I'm trying very hard to not interrupt you. The chat messages got to me. So
No, don't
so,
worry
yeah.
at all. No,
Yeah,
I
so-
do it all the time. Like with my podcast with Xander, like we're constantly shouting over each other because we're just so excited. Like,
I actually have a few topics queued up related to one thing you guys were talking about later.
Yeah.
But okay, so like if you're working with flashcards, it's easy. But the thing is, in SuperMemo, you're not only working with flashcards. You have these topics, right?
Yeah.
So how did you use them effectively for your the things you're learning? Like if you use the variables as an example, right? How much you were struggling, because I see that too when I'm working with interns. Like right now, there's an intern who is basically changing careers, adult, right? And that adult hasn't really written that much code. So explaining them functions and variables is like, it's Greek, right? They don't understand it. It's a strange language.
Yeah.
So
it's super difficult. Like, so the first thing I'd say with the topics, so topics to people who don't who don't know anything about SuperMemo, topics are basically just like articles or book chapters or sort of like long form content, right? And so you import that into like a queue, you give it a priority, and then over time you'll get shown these articles, and you sort of read through as much as you want, and then you just go on to the next one, you read through as much as you want, go on to the next one. So you're sort of reading many different pieces of content all in parallel, and it's sort of spaced over time, similar to the way the flashcards are spaced. And so basically what I would do, like my number one learning resource for any domain, but I especially like it for computer science, is Wikipedia. I mean, Wikipedia is like the ultimate learning resource for someone. Like it's better than like 99% of paid things. It's completely free. It's like the ultimate interdisciplinary textbook because everything's hyperlinked together, right? Even like when you have like topics that sort of cross over multiple domains, then you sort of get exposed to a lot of different things, even if you're just studying computer science. So what I would do is I'd sort of separate my sort of practical programming, like actually typing code into the computer and running it and writing programs, from the theoretical side or the learning SuperMemo sort of side, where I was like reading articles and creating flashcards. Those were kind of separate to me throughout this entire time. Like I was never or very rarely actually creating flashcards like while I was in an IDE or something like that, right? So basically what I do at the beginning of the day, I read through these articles and I create flashcards. And then actually the much more significant portion of time, probably 90% of the time I spent doing programming, studying, was actually spent writing code. So I realized that I'm rambling a little bit here. But,
no. How much time was spent writing code? Did you say? I didn't get the percentage.
So it would be like 90% actually writing code, working on projects.
Nice.
Doing practical things like working it like at the beginning. I remember I had this like project to just like learn Linux and stuff like that. So I just sit in Linux and I don't know, just immerse myself. Like that's really how I think of the split. So it's just like in language learning, you have this split between immersion time when you're immersing in native content or something like that, and then you have the SRS time. And the SRS time ideally should be much less than the immersion time. I really do feel that most of the progress is going to come from, it's going to be driven by that immersion. So immersion in the programming context, writing code in your IDE, just smashing lines into the code editor and running it over and over again and stuff like that. And then that 10% is where you like consolidate your knowledge, make sure that it doesn't just decay over time. And yeah, that's definitely the split that I'd use. And in fact, I'll say it again because it's probably the most important thing that I've observed amongst other people beginning programming and learning it alongside SRS, is that, you know, people get really trapped into either spending way too much time in the SRS or not spending their time doing like meaningful projects to themselves. So they just spend their time doing like tutorials and stuff like that. I think the optimum way to do it, or the best way that I've observed in myself and in other people, is to have meaningful projects that you're working on and doing that for 90% of the time. And then 10% of the time, you're going to want to be reviewing flashcards and stuff like that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. It's like it gets back to the like I don't want to say mindless action, but it's like if you do preparation, right, then you can do less thinking and actually just do execution, right? So programming, you do end up thinking and trying to make abstractions, but you're not thinking about what is a variable, what is, like, if you're using JavaScript or a language which supports mutable and immutable stuff, like at least you write out a constant, you create variables, you don't think about these things. Like, so it definitely makes sense that you learn the theory once, you just learn it, and then I think like you're deploying spaced repetition when you're doing the 90%, like repeating it itself. Like maybe it's not technically spaced repetition, but it is some kind of repetition. So either it's muscle memory or whatever else you want to call it, but it is kind of a repetition, and you should do it much more than read about it or watch people, which is more common now, right? You're buying a course on Udemy for a few dollars, and then
it's funny actually. Like Piotr Wozniak, the guy who created this spaced repetition thing, he has this quote that's like, you don't need spaced repetition, what you need is repetition. And you can get repetition naturally, as you said, like through the process of doing just programming. You're going to be repeating concepts that are going to come up very, very often. But you can also do it in an optimized way, where the algorithm is calculating these optimal intervals for you and trying to minimize the amount of time you're wasting, right? And so where the spaced repetition side of things really comes in handy is like when your knowledge grows to the point where obtaining, like it becomes harder and harder to get a nice distribution of oh sorry, that's like
no worries, second.
It becomes harder and harder to get a nice distribution of repetition across every concept in your memory, if you know what I mean. So some of them are going to be repeated many times, and so when you're doing your programming, you're going to be doing a lot of like variable assignments, so you're going to be repeating that concept many times, but maybe you don't come across things like concurrency or and synchronization, stuff like that very often. Maybe you're using a programming language for like a couple of years where you just don't do a ton of like concurrency stuff. So it becomes really handy then when you can just learn something that's really deep and useful and complicated, like concurrency, and then not lose it over time, so that when you do come back to it in the future, it's still going to be there.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting challenge, because like you have the same, I see that happening with younger people. I talk to developers who are learning stuff, who either want to work for a FANG company, these bigger ones, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and so on, Google. They want to work there, so they're learning a lot of stuff, right? Algorithms and so on. So Anki is actually a really good thing to deploy there, or a SuperMemo, spaced repetition in general, right? But there you have that problem of, okay, you're learning this, you might not need it now, but there's going to be a case in the future where you're working in a, let's say you're working on a big application and there's a hot path where you have a lot of code being run or a lot of things happening at the same time. Then oh, I remember that, or maybe you remember it really good. But I think there's a balance. I don't know, like if you would automate this practicing, right, the practicing of writing code, I don't know how you would do that if you wanted to make a system for that.
For it would schedule times for you to sort of write code. Do you mean that?
Yeah, there is actually, Destroy All Software has made something which is called executeprogram.com. Have you checked that out before?
I think I've heard of it, but I haven't checked it out yet.
I can show it very quickly on screen. I personally haven't used it, so it might not work great, but let's take a quick look at it here. Let's see if I can get it on screen. Do you see it here?
Yes.
So it's basically a spaced repetition for coding, right? So they create interactive lessons. So this would be a way to systematize the practicing of the actual physical part, right? So not flashcards, but actual problems you're solving. So it looks like the way they're going to structure it is via courses, right? TypeScript basic, everyday TypeScript, SQL. So this might actually work, but I haven't tried it. So have you tried it?
I've not tried it. Like, one thing that I did do is like I would put flashcard, like I would add like a question, like an algorithms question to the front of the card, and then say like solve this, and then the answer would be like the answer to the thing. But I find that just doesn't work at all, because like one of the principles of formulating these flashcards is that they have to be atomic, right? So you have to be asking just about one specific thing. And so the problem is that when you have really long answer, like something that would take you 5 minutes to write out, when you tell the flashcard program that you either remembered or that you, when you tell the flashcard program, for example, that you failed that card, it's not like you're failing a specific. It's difficult to know which specific part of that answer you failed. And so basically, when you have that sort of situation, the card has become too complex, and it can no longer really be scheduled with spaced repetition. But what might be useful is like I talked about this whole topic scheduling thing, where in SuperMemo it shows you like articles and stuff like that progressively over time in a similar way to how the flashcards are shown. But you're not asked a question, you're just shown this thing, and then you can just sort of do as much as you want and then move on to the next thing. I think that would be good for code. Like if I could just add some program in that, I wasn't too concerned about finishing really quickly, and then I could just come back to it progressively over time. It's not necessarily asking me a question and then trying to work out the optimum time to show it to me. It's just saying, come back and see this later, basically.
So do you have like an example we could look at for like, I don't know if you made these kind of cards, the input type, right? In Anki, there are type in, there's a syntax for that. Is there something similar in a SuperMemo, and did you use it?
Yes. Let me take a look. I think I actually deleted quite a few of those cards. So I can take a look around, but I'm pretty sure I got rid of them. But an example of where I would have used that is like for Linux command line utilities.
Nice.
So for example, like the common text processing utilities like sed and awk, grep, those can be really useful. But I just found that when you're adding them into the flashcard program, often you add in things that you don't know are going to be useful. Like I'd find myself going to Wikipedia or going to other sites and finding what are other people using these tools for, how are they using them, then adding them into the like flashcard program. But this is before actually having ever even used these tools, if you know what I mean. So I'm trying to learn before I apply. When I think the best way to do it.
Sorry.
Oh yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was actually talking with Gillem about this offline on Discord, and he told me like I was showing him I wanted to build a tool, and I still want to build that tool, but like that tool could encourage like mindless learning or you just, if you can easily batch import, right? Anki makes it easy to use shared decks, right? Because I'm not talking about collaboration. I'm just talking about somebody makes a deck and exports it and then shares it. That's possible. So people end up in the situation where they download a Korean deck, Japanese deck, C#, Python, computer science, algorithms, fundamentals, and then you have 20,000 cards. You don't even know if you're going to need it. And there is value in the process of SuperMemo, right? That it is manual, where you figure out what's important, you take the information and then break it down and then continue from there, right? Instead of just getting batch imports of stuff, and it doesn't really make sense. You don't know if you're going to need it, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's like tons of examples of like failure patterns and easy ways to shoot yourself in the foot, and I've probably done a lot of them for programming. Like you'll notice that a lot of these cards, they're really just asking like this, like API stands for, like it's not that useful. It's really like concrete and specific, and honestly not very interesting. Like these kinds of cards just aren't that interesting to review. Another thing that I did very often was, like, for example, when I was learning C, I would like look at the standard library functions for interacting with files, for like opening, reading files, writing to files, creating new files and directories and stuff like that. And then I'd create cards that said, like, in C, how do you create a new file? How do you write to a file and stuff like that? And it's just like, it's so specific to C and the C standard library, and you're testing you're testing yourself on things that are kind of arbitrary and just that were implemented by the people who made C in kind of an arbitrary way. So for example, like the order of the parameters in certain function calls is really arbitrary and doesn't really matter in a lot of ways. But if you're testing yourself on stuff like that, it's just going to become really mindless and asemantic and just boring. So like instead of learning that kind of stuff, what I moved to sort of in the future is learning more kind of like, look at this is just terrible. But what I moved to later on was learning about like more conceptual stuff. So for example, instead of asking specifically about functions in the C standard library to do with file input output stuff, what I would ask about is like file input output in general. Like, what is a file? What does it mean to write to a file? And like what happens if two different programs write to a file at the same time? Like stuff that's more conceptual and applies to many different programming languages. So you try and find those concepts that are programming language invariant and create cards out of those concepts, because then whenever you change to a different programming language, it's going to stay relevant. So if I quickly sort and show you the kinds of things that I'm learning about right now, you might find that they're a little bit more interesting. So
wait, are you learning C# if you go back one card?
Yes. That's yeah, like C# is like the main language I'm really interested in, because it's the language that SuperMemo Assistant, which is like the plugin architecture for SuperMemo, that's the programming language they use. So that's the one that I really got into. That's when my kind of programming skill started to take off a little bit more, I'd say. Oh, sorry, I should go back.
What is the SuperMemo Assistant, just quickly? I don't know.
Oh, yeah, sure. So SuperMemo Assistant is like, it's a super interesting project. So there's this guy, Alexi, big SuperMemo fan. He decided, I think back in 2018, that he wanted to add kind of like a plugin framework to around SuperMemo, so that you'd have something similar to the add-on ecosystem in Anki, but you'd have it in SuperMemo. So he did it in like the coolest way possible. It's like because SuperMemo is closed source and wasn't really interested in collaborating with anyone on creating like a plugin infrastructure. So what Alexi did basically is reverse engineer a ton of the SuperMemo code, and then he's built this .NET C# application around it. It sort of acts like a chip on the brain of SuperMemo. I think that's how he describes it. And then that basically allows you to call SuperMemo native functions from C#, and then you can like build plugins and interact with like SuperMemo's registries. You can add elements and everything. And yeah, it's super cool. Like hardly anyone's, I think I might be the only person who's ever actually, tried to write plugins in it. It's like, I guess the SuperMemo community is a lot smaller and kind of more niche than Anki's, right? But the plugin framework that you built was really good. Yeah. But yeah, just quickly, like to show you kind of the style of flashcard that I would recommend over the ones that I showed you before, which are the ones that I created in the beginning, like something like this. Like it's way more conceptual, that links together computer science with like biology. So this is Alan Kay, who was like important in the creation of these object-oriented programming languages. He says, I thought of objects being like biological cells. Like, he's telling me like the analogy he used between objects and biological systems. And then, for example, asking about the design of languages and, multiple inheritance complicating things like method resolution order and stuff like that. Like some stuff about assembly, which is like the low level fundamentals of programming and stuff like that. So it's way more interesting stuff. I think, let me try and find
Nice.
yeah, more about like the theory and stuff like that. And I wanted to find one. I can't find the exact one that I was looking for, but
can't you search in SuperMemo?
I could. I'm reluctant to, just because it's gonna mess up like the layout of the windows, unfortunately, which is kind of annoying. But yeah, I do a lot of comparisons between the languages that I've used and between the programming paradigms that I've been exposed to. So, for example, comparing the style of inheritance in JavaScript and like C#. So in JavaScript, you have like what's called prototypal inheritance or something like that, or at least like classic JavaScript. I think they have like classes now or something like that. But yeah, and comparing that with C# and seeing like what's the advantage of one over the other, in what context would you prefer one over the other, and stuff like that. It's just way more interesting to ask those sorts of questions. And so in the beginning, because you don't have that much knowledge about like computer science and different programming languages, you don't have experience with many different programming languages that you can compare and contrast. Like, you don't have like the necessary framework to ask those kinds of questions. So in the beginning, you're kind of restricted to very simple, like kind of boring questions that I showed you in the beginning. But over time, you can add more of these way more interesting and conceptual cards, which I definitely recommend.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I was thinking about it, like, for example, if I don't know if you looked into networking, but just knowing if you're building web applications or either client side or server side, just knowing what the OSI model is, right? That there are different layers, like there is something called HTTP, the protocol, how that works, DNS, how that works. That can, like, you can basically be a wizard. You can be a wizard just knowing that you're able to debug at a different level, right? Versus somebody who doesn't know these layers. These things are not just pure facts. You're just learning about understanding, like, how do these protocols work fundamentally, stuff like that. Getting that into this is really valuable, because you can then use it for debugging, right? You can, instead of just, oh, what's going wrong with my application, you can just figure out, okay, this is where I am, and here are possible things I could check. And then, like, for example, somebody who knows HTTP could debug much more differently than somebody who only understands CSS, right? They don't know what's happening with asynchronous calls or the methods, right? Get, post, and so on.
Yeah, exactly. Like learning those fundamental, like the fundamentals and digging beneath the surface and stuff like that, it just becomes more and more important over time. Like programming is one of those skills where I think it's kind of easy to plateau. It's sort of similar to, like, if you just imagine, like, everyone probably who's watching this like types on a keyboard, right? But people just, they learn to type when they're a kid, and then they just plateau at like a certain speed. But then, of course, there are people who take typing very seriously and really try and improve their speed and so on, and they reach much higher speeds than you achieve just by sort of working at something just kind of randomly and just not really focusing on it. Like, over time, I think you sort of seen the same sort of plateau in programming. If you're just doing the same thing day to day, not expanding sort of your knowledge of the fundamentals, then you're just going to plateau after like 3 years or something and not get any better. But if you consistently push yourself, and SRS is a great way to do this, to learn about those fundamentals, like you said, like the OSI model, or for example, like assembly, things like complicated things like concurrency and stuff like that, it's going to change your programming both in ways that you described. Like, it's going to have direct sort of applicable effects to your programming, like allowing you to debug because you know about the OSI model and stuff like that. But it's also going to change your behavior in implicit ways, like in ways that you couldn't connect it back to that, like a specific point of knowledge, but you'll just behave differently when you program, like because you have more experience, you'll be able to structure things more cleverly. You'll be using all of that knowledge, that fundamental knowledge, in just like implicit ways as well. Yeah, like I don't know, SRS is just such a good way to develop those skills. You can really push yourself beyond like a plateau.
Yeah, absolutely. And like learning assembly in itself is not that valuable, but while you're learning assembly, you're going to learn more about computer architecture. You're going to learn about resources, like why does thing happen at all, right? What is the physical parts and registers, and then those concepts, they keep on coming up in like in newer things. They are in programming languages. They're not only in the old stuff, they're still present today. You just don't see them, right? They're in a different layer and you don't have any association to them. But the understanding is going to be very valuable, depending on what kind of work you do, of course.
Yeah. I completely agree with that. And yeah, I'd argue that you're not going to get worse from learning assembly. And, you know, counterintuitively, you're actually going to get a ton better, like a programming. It's like, that's what I was talking about before. Like, it's going to change your behavior and your mental model of the computer in implicit ways that you can't tie directly back to having learned assembly and having typed in those like weird opcodes and operands and all of that stuff. But even though you're probably not going to be like writing like an entire program in assembly, or you might never touch it again, it's still going to have it's still going to have a huge influence, I think, over everything you do in the future. And like from what I've seen, like the best programmers, like I mentioned Alexi, the only reason he was able to do something like SuperMemo Assistant and add that plugin architecture to SuperMemo was because in his younger days he'd been interested in like learning things related to like reverse engineering and stuff like that. So and that required him to learn about assembly code and the low level details of like computer architecture and stuff like that. So it could actually become practically useful for you in the future. But even if it doesn't, it's still going to have major benefits, I think.
Yeah, so I'm just quickly checking Discord. If anybody on Twitch has questions, please drop them now. Now's the time for that. So I see Gillem wrote on Discord here, he no longer makes new cards in Anki. And he also kindly shared the link to Augmenting Cognition. Let me drop that on Twitch. And we'll have the links. All of the links will be in the description, so no worries about that. So do you still use Anki, or have you totally moved away to SuperMemo?
I've totally moved away. I think maybe a year ago I tried to write a plugin for Anki, but I wasn't actually using Anki.
See, so I wrote down like the 20 rules of knowledge formulation, right? Just wrote that down in the notes. You have a YouTube video on that. Let me see what happened to the screen. There, the screen is there. So do you have a video covering this? Is that the podcast episode you did?
Yeah, we did like I think it was called like Beyond the 20 Rules or something. We didn't just we covered like a little bit about the 20 rules and knowledge formulation. Then we sort of tried to add like our own experiences and stuff. That was with Zander. He's a good buddy.
Yeah, nice. I started listening to parts of it. We'll add a link to that. So if you could summarize it with one sentence, what is the 20 rules of knowledge formulation and why should anybody read it? One sentence.
Man, okay. I'd say, yeah, the 20 rules of knowledge formulation is like the Bible of flashcard creation. That's what I'd say in one sentence.
Amazing.
Yeah. But I'd say like, you know, it's only one document. I think there's so much more to explore about knowledge formulation. It's just that not many people have written about it. I know that, have you heard of Andy Matushak? I think he's...
That's the next guy I wanted to talk about. It's actually funny that you're mentioning Andy, because Andy used to be a developer at Apple. He used to be an Apple engineer. And the way I don't know him personally, but the way I know Andy is from talks at Apple. When I was an iOS developer back in the day, that's how I started professionally as a developer. I was writing Objective-C code, like maybe making small iPhone applications back in the day. So I remember Andy very well. In like, he's in a dark room And he like Apple has this every year. They have lots of talks about their APIs. So that's like, so it's so weird to see Andy in this project because I totally know his name and his face from somewhere else. So maybe you could tell us about is it the Orbit project or specifically prompts?
So I haven't actually checked out Orbit yet. It'd be good to have like, you should have had Xander here. I know he's checked it out and he's like much more engaged in keeping up to date with Orbit and Andy's work. Like we did an interview. Me and Xander did an interview with Andy, and we did actually ask him like a bunch of stuff about like his thoughts on like item formulation and his Orbit project. So the way I understand Orbit is that it's like a new kind of spaced repetition system where I think it's going to be like Anki in that you can add your prompts, he calls them prompts, but they're basically flashcards, into the system and review them over time. But there's also this other mechanism for adding prompts into your system, which is like you have an author, they write an article and they sort of embed these prompts in the article. So they're written for you by the author, and then you answer them in the context of the article, and then they get added into your system and repeated over time. So it's kind of like, he calls it the mnemonic medium. It's sort of this, that's what he calls sort of the embedding of these flashcards inside the article with the context and everything. I think that's basically what's going on. Yeah.
That's pretty cool, because if he's successful, like this is the thing, like there's so many people who don't understand spaced repetition, and I'm convinced it's going to go mainstream. So like his project is interesting, and also Zorby, which was mentioned earlier. We have a separate video on that. So like, I don't know who's going to do it. Anki still has a role. SuperMemo still could do it, right? Like any of these players could still do it. So it's going to be interesting to see who, like, is it going to be normal part of school in the future, or is it going to become a part of the web? Like, how is it going to, because spaced repetition obviously works, right? There are students all around the world acing exams, professionals learning, but it's not mainstream. Like what's going to take it over the mainstream? Like there's a graph, I can maybe share that later, but it's getting close to that, where it's past the early adopters. Normal people care about spaced repetition now because they know it works, right?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I'm really interested in this as well. So there's this really good quote from Piotr Wozniak again. So he said that like spaced repetition is basically antiviral. So if you imagine you have like a viral video, kind of like, I don't know, a cat video or a meme or something like that, it can just spread so easily because people just want to share it. It's funny or whatever, or it has some other response that makes people want to share it. Spaced repetition is like the opposite, because I think fundamentally you can think of spaced repetition like something like a healthy diet or exercise. Like, it has benefits, but they're often kind of in the future, in the long-term future. It's not obvious to you, having used spaced repetition for one day, that it's going to be something that's really beneficial to you. It actually requires you to put in a ton of effort to get, well, not a ton of effort, but it requires you to be consistent, doing repetitions basically every day for a long period to see results. So that's really the challenge that these new sort of spaced repetition apps, I think they're targeting a lot more. Everyone's trying to target the mainstream audience, I think, which is going to be super challenging. Just like I said, like you're basically competing with what people like to do in their free time, essentially. If you're targeting like outside of schools, I guess you're competing with like Netflix and YouTube and stuff. And then inside school, I think there's opportunity, but a problem with school is that you're often learning things that you don't really want to be learning. And then if you're adding, so it's already kind of miserable. And then if you add in spaced repetition into the mix, where you're sort of repeating these things that you don't really want to learn over and over again every single day, you're just going to sort of accelerate the boredom and misery. And so you have to hope that the sort of increase in your grades sort of that sort of makes up for the misery of having to repeat these flashcards. And so if that's the case, then I guess people will adopt it. But then if everyone adopts it, then it's not so much of an advantage in terms of your grade. So I don't know. There's a whole bunch of like different ways you could think about this. But
yeah, so I'm probably the wrong person to talk about this because I'm still fairly young, relatively speaking, with regards to the internet. But like I've heard the internet be called the highway, the information highway, right? The way the internet was pitched, oh, these amazing nodes connected, you can send emails, but it was very focused on the technology part, right? And I feel that's where spaced repetition is, like probably in the early 90s of the internet. Not normal for normal people to use it, but people are gradually using it. So I think if the spaced repetition goes above the tools and the tech stack, right? Then I think that's, or also where it's approachable, right? Like SuperMemo, I think it's a great tool, and I look forward to exploring it more personally. But the challenge there is the user interface. People can't stand it, and and I don't want to go into a tangent and rant, but it's how do you deal with that?
So SuperMemo's got like a lot of rough edges. So yeah, I'd just be so thrilled if someone came along and made something better, you know? So really the thing that's tying me to SuperMemo is that it's really focused on, I guess it's focused on like the kind of the obsessive learner, I guess, the person who's going to be putting in a lot of time into this system. Like, so you mentioned that a lot of these spaced repetition apps, they're going after the mainstream audience. But sorry, I'll turn that back on.
No worries.
But when they do that, they're going to be focusing on features that the more experienced learner might not care about. So things like the UI, like exactly what the UI looks like, whether the borders are rounded or whether they have a nice drop shadow or whatever. That's like the kind of thing that someone who's more hardcore into just pure performance and memory performance and learning performance isn't really going to care about. And so what I like about SuperMemo is that it was made by Woz basically just for himself, and then he just released it because he thought, like, why not? And so what you have is a guy who's pursued this really obsessively and taken it to its logical end, and he's not tried to just pander to or market it in any significant way. It's like kind of like a failure case of marketing, really, because it's quite poorly marketed. Like if you go to the website, it looks like it's from the 1990s. It's really hard to actually buy SuperMemo. Sometimes you have to wait for 3 days before it actually gets sent to you. And but I just love that it's got all of these advanced features, like everything you'd ever need to work on your learning is in there. So that's what I like about it.
It's insane. Think about it. Like this person has been working on this project since the 80s, right?
Yeah.
That's insane to think about it. Like amazing. And not only that, there are features in there. If you tell people about it, they're going to be surprised. Like I'm sure he's probably forgotten features in there by now.
Yeah, definitely. I think actually, think about it. Like, I think the best approach for these new spaced repetition apps, and I've said this to a couple of people, right, is to focus on making your application like as modular as possible. So what Anki does well but not great is like the plugin architecture and system, right? So people who have expertise in some domain can add functionality to the general scheduling operations. That's basically what at the core of Anki is focused around scheduling something, right? So you have these flashcards, you add them into the system, schedule them over time. But then people who have specific interests and needs, like the language learning people, they can create those programs that modify aspects of the core to do what they want. So having a really robust plugin system, making it as modular as possible so that you can compose functionality together to create a more specific product for the experts or for the new user, that's the way to go. And Anki is the best one to do it so far. But honestly, like it doesn't come close to like a really robust plugin system. Like things break constantly. Damien doesn't seem to like announce when things are going to break. He just sort of pushes an update and tons of add-ons just break and stuff like that. There are a ton of problems. Like we could get into it because I've used like the plugin system in Anki. I've checked out, like I've made plugins for Obsidian. I've made obviously I've been really invested in like learning SuperMemo Assistant and making plugins and working on the core for that. So it's like, yeah, I think there's way better ways to do it, and that's like having a modular system is going to be a core part of the winning the winning space repetition app, I think.
Yeah, I could talk to you for hours. I'm so happy you were the first guest. You have like an interesting background, and you've gained some knowledge on specific topics that are interesting to talk about. And everything you mentioned just now at the end, it's like I have opinions on that too. But I don't want to go into that now. Maybe I could come and be a guest on your YouTube channel in the future and
Dude,
talk to you and Xander. That would be great. Yeah,
that would be awesome. Like, there aren't so many people who are interested in specifically that part, like, you know, talking about the design of a space repetition system and how to actually make it, you know. So I'd love to do that. Yeah, I'll definitely have you on for.
Nice. I'm going to try to take you up on that then in the future. Yeah. So I have like just wrapping up 2 questions, like no new questions from the chat. I'll double check Discord. Looks silent. So it looks like you're running SuperMemo in a virtual machine. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
So why are you doing that?
It only runs on Windows, so you've got to run it inside a virtual machine, which is just like, yeah, it's not ideal. But yeah, it just goes to show you, like, these are the lengths that people are willing to go to use SuperMemo, because it just does have those features like incremental reading and stuff, and lots of the advanced scheduling features and stuff that just other apps just don't have. So it's like I'm kind of tied to it, you know, in a way. If there was something better, I would use it. I would switch in a heartbeat. You know, I'm not tied to SuperMemo dogmatically. Like there are parts that I wouldn't leave behind. Like I think the whole like philosophy of SuperMemo and like was his writings, I'd like carry that, you know, wherever I go. I wouldn't just leave that behind. But yeah, the software itself, yeah, please someone create a better one.
Yeah, if you're somebody watching right now, a developer, please create a better version.
Yeah.
So yeah, wrapping up, is there anything you would like to share with anyone watching now or on YouTube? Something you would like to highlight?
I'd say, like, yeah, just to bring it back to what I said at the beginning, because I think it's important to stress, and it is like the number one thing I've observed amongst people learning programming. Make sure you get that immersion time, that 90% immersion time. That should be spent doing projects that are meaningful to you, not just grinding tutorials, not just copying code and running that. Like, pick like just some kind of project that you're interested in and pursue that as obsessively as you can, and that is the way that you're going to make the most progress. And then just reserve that 10% of time for doing your flashcards, reading articles and stuff like that. That is the way that you're going to see the most progress. That's what I've observed in so many people starting programming, and yeah, that's just what I'd really stress.
Great. Thank you so much for being the first guest on the Learning for Life podcast. We talked about several cool topics, space repetition. I'm so happy this was the first topic, because this is a lifelong learning tool you could use. You can use this forever. The tools might change, but the technique is probably going to be the same when you're watching this 10, 20 years from now. So James has a YouTube channel. It should be on screen somewhere. Go check out his videos. If you don't love long form content like I do, I love it. I can watch it all day. Just put it on 2x speed or 1.5x speed. It works. You can put on subtitles even. You're still going to see. It's in English, so it's understandable.
Yeah. Watch it incrementally. There you go.
Yeah, there you go. Incremental viewing. That also works. Thank you very much, everybody in the chat, for joining. We are gonna, the next live stream is on Tuesday, and the YouTube video will be out on Monday, hopefully. So edit it out, and I'll send you a link later, James, so you can take a look if you want to. And maybe you have more links we can put in the description and pin. So yeah, have a great morning, evening, whatever it is, wherever you are. And until next time, happy learning. Bye.
Yes, see ya.